Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I had some interesting information to pass on about the head of the Temple of Set, Michael Aquino, who died about a year ago, last September, and doesn't seem to have been very publicized by anybody. And of course, he hasn't been the head of the Temple of Set for quite some time. Other people have been running it. Several other people have been running it who took it over. And it seems like it was difficult to find any kind of qualified person to do it. For years, Don Webb was running the Temple of Set. And he's kind of a goofball science fiction writer. Very comical in nature, not a very serious scholar type, which you would expect out of the Temple of Set, the pseudo-intellectual organization that is, with this Boy Scout, this top who reached the highest level of Boy Scout, Michael Aquino, who then took his badge-winning skills to college, got himself a political science degree, one of those degrees you get because it's one of the easiest degrees to get. So he certainly didn't get anything in science. He didn't get anything everywhere. And Aquino came to my attention, first of all, in the book Futhark from this Edred Flowers, otherwise known as Thorson, who actually thanked him in the introduction of the book, along with several other people who all turned out to be Satanists. So it wasn't like they were hiding it that much. And I guess there were people within the Nordic movement there, the Nordic pagans, the Odinists and Asatru people, that were very well aware of this, and to a degree. But most people didn't know about it, and I didn't know about it until I heard about it from some bizarre black satanic witch who told me this, etc. So the whole idea is that he was noted to actually be involved with these people, thanking them, etc. So he wasn't trying to cover it up, and I go, well, who is this guy? And then I come to hear about this on the Roy Tuckman Show, a national public radio. He had 5 hours from midnight to 5 a.m. where he talked about all this. He had Terrence McKenna on. He had all these things. This was a time when you didn't hear much of this stuff. This was pre-Art Bell and other times. So he was doing this in Los Angeles to a dedicated but probably small audience, being at the different times that he was on. And he's on for many, many years. He may still be on for all I know. This is something I don't know if he was paid for or anything else. But so he exposed all these people and all the conspiracies and talked about ayahuasca and all these other things. So you really never heard this anywhere else. And it was a Los Angeles station. It didn't really go out that far in terms of broadcast strength. So it was difficult to pick him up once you got out of the Los Angeles area, which of course has millions and millions of people in it, but he did this for years and years, and there's a lot of good information there. And what he used to highlight a lot is Michael Aquino. And this is what a time when he was getting into trouble, and there was reports of this. There's a book by Jeannie Scott, who had an affair with him and talks about the Temple of Set in general from an outsider's viewpoint. So all of this is what's happening at this time, and that's how he came to my attention. And of course, Satanism was a big thing back then, as we were getting into all these big publicity on the Satanists and what was happening around the country. These ritual murders, these ritual molestations, drinking blood, killing animals. All the thing was very big there, and of course this was on national TV as well. But I'm not going to go too much into that right now. We'll be here for a long time. There's a lot to talk about in those areas, and I get into that in future videos here. But it has come to my attention that apparently there is being stated now, and the information was passed on to me by what appears to be a Satanist, that his death certificate stated that he died from a gunshot wound to the head, a close gunshot wound to the head. This either brings us to two different conclusions here, that he was murdered. Generally, when you murder somebody, you don't get that close, but certainly can be, or suicide. So very interesting that this would be. And of course, we don't have any real information of what's going on. I have tried to find this out, but I'm not going to spend endless hours to this. I just don't have the time reading these different things. It does state in one person's talk about his death that he was suffering from illness for a while. Now, This certainly would be understandable if someone would commit suicide. Maybe they have Alzheimer's, maybe they have other problems, maybe they're in horrible pain. So suicide isn't what people think it is, spontaneous act of irrationality. And many times it can be a rational act. If you're in horrible pain, or if you're having delusional problems like with Alzheimer's and dementia, this is what Robin Williams did. Robin Williams was unable to function like he used to. And he was pretty crazy type dude, expecting to have this ability to function like he did, quick-witted, jumping around. Now, if you can't do that anymore, your life is over with. And if you can't go out in public, or you go out in public and you're drooling on yourself, or whatever happened, I believe this happened to Peter Falk, the actor of Columbo, who was found on the streets of Beverly Hills wandering around and didn't know where he was at. So, needless to say, is that preferable, being in that state of not even knowing who you are? And people don't understand that, with Alzheimer's, you forget everything. You forget all the people you love and care about. A lot of these people forget even how to use the toilet. Well, they poop on themselves. So the whole idea is that this is quite, people don't talk about this. So the whole idea, if he had some sort of terrible illness and killed himself, well, that's understandable. But we do need to understand that this can't have something to do with failure. This guy has a big military retirement. He has all the benefits of that: medical, food, go to the base, get everything tax-free. He also came from a wealthy family. Mother left him millions and millions of dollars. He also recently bought a giant estate, apparently, I don't know, giant, but in Scotland, and became a lord of the dirt. So, so the whole idea is this certainly wasn't a money issue. And it doesn't seem that he was under pressure that we know of from anybody, unless there were new charges brought up against him from the olden days, which you're talking about, 20, 30 years ago. He certainly was fairly public. You can find lots of his talks on YouTube. Secondly, this is a guy who had some of the highest security clearances that you can get. He was the first member, which is kind of interesting that I just listened to another interview with him, with the Army Space Intelligence. What? What is the Army doing with space intelligence? Wouldn't that be part of the Air Force? So he was the first officer to take over that new branch at Cherokee Mountain, the big secret base there, and monitor space. And he claims that they didn't see anything noticed, but he can't really talk, and you can't believe anything this guy says. He's a master manipulator, but he never admitted to anything except for the fact, there's some weird stuff up there. And the fact, like everybody cops out to. Almost anybody you talk about extraterrestrials and so forth will say, well, the universe is so big, it's got to be that. That's not the question. The question is, do you believe extraterrestrials are visiting, have visited, and are continuing to visit Earth? That's what you need to ask people, not if there are extraterrestrials. So this is what they all cop out. So he's got the company line like all these people do. So it's really kind of boring. You're going to hear, the universe is billions of... it just makes me sleep. So the whole idea is that this is what everybody says, because that's what the scientists say. The dumb suckers out there say that. Not wanting to commit to anything, but also not wanting to be caught with it. So the whole idea is that, and of course he's under high level secrecy. You can't go around saying you've seen this, you've seen that. So anytime you talk to the military, anytime anybody who's worked with the military, or even in military contractors, aerospace, etc., well, they're under security clearances. They can't say anything. If they do, you're going to get into serious trouble. Don't think that this doesn't happen. The U.S. military and all of its intelligence branches have huge amounts of police within there. Everybody saw NCIS. Everybody knows of that TV show. Well, that's a type of Navy military police, and they don't show boring shows, but they go around and talk to people who may have been involved in something to make sure that they're not talking. I've even had a person who was a dumb private, but since I guess he was such a low-level coward, that this Keith guy was the fact that they contacted him on several occasions to find out what he was up to, because they didn't trust him, I guess. So the whole idea is that these things happen and there's this military investigator. So you don't get away with stuff. That's why you can't really believe anything anybody tells you. And there are a few whistleblowers. And you have to understand that most likely they're letting these whistleblowers talk. They certainly could shut them up. They could do all sorts of things if they wanted to. But, this is a sneaky way of getting information out there. And, of course, you get a guy like this whistleblower or whomever, not Aquino, obviously, who's just a mouthpiece. And then they discredit you, and you're laughed at. So you can make whatever conclusions you want to, and it's very typical in disinformation is they'll release both sides of the story. Yes, it is real. No, it isn't. So what happens is half the population hear one of those stories and the other population. So you got to always have a 50-50 split. The CIA ultimately came out and said they believed in remote viewing and psychic power, and that 5% of the results were mind-boggling correct. Before that, 10 years before that, they came out and said, no, it's all nonsense. So this is what happens all the time. So with Michael Aquino, this was a big time. He became to prominence. He was on a lot of TV shows, Geraldo Rivera, Sally Jesse Raphael. I think he was on almost every TV show at that time because this was the big satanic scare, and he was getting named as well. And, of course, he went out and denied everything, and that happened, of course, so he was kind of protecting himself as well. But apparently he was more than happy to do interviews. And I don't know if he was still in the military at this time or not. The military declined to renew his contract with them, whatever that means, as a officer, and they stated they had plenty of evidence against him, but they did not want to further it. This is because they're afraid of lawsuits and everything else, which would have been in the millions. And, of course, there were lots of lawsuits that the Army settled as well. So to make this into a circus would have been very bad for the military, especially since they had a high-ranking officer whose next position would have been general, a guy that had huge clearances, some of the highest available, and worked in Cherokee Mountain. So, I mean, this is pretty amazing stuff. But that's another issue. I've covered some of this already in the other one. But apparently this is what he has died from, a gunshot wound to the head. Now, what is this? Well, we can say that he committed suicide. We could say that he was murdered. Well, what is it? And was this a despondent suicide or the fact that he was sick? As I said, it's stated there that he's been sick for a long period of time. So he may have been very disabled at this point. We also have to understand that he was, I believe, 76 to 74, I believe, at the time of his death. This is under the national average. Now, the national average of life expectancy is 77 to 78. It's actually fallen down a bit in the United States because of other issues, and may have went down because of COVID as well. So we don't know, but it's around, we'll give it the lower end here, 77 years old. Your average person easily makes it past that. That's your average. But most people have any kind of decent medical care and have been for the last 50 to 60 years, have been living to about in their middle 80s, middle to late 80s. People make it to 86, 87 all the time and have been, if you look at old movie stars, they're all making it into their middle 80s, most of them. So this is quite common, and people are now living into their early 90s, although it appears to be infirm. And if you're dying at 91 or 92, it means they're probably not too well. So the whole idea is that it is not common, though, to do it. So if you don't make it to 78, you haven't done very well based on the national averages. And this is even higher around the world. The Japanese, the Italians are all living, or used to be the average into their 86, 87. This was the average. So if you had any kind of decent health, it means you're living close to 90. So he certainly didn't make it that well. He has a lot of books he's written, etc. But I mean, this is the newest, the latest and greatest on this particular situation. I do find it interesting that this has kind of been covered up. And we have to understand why. Well, why was this covered up then? Why has this not been a public statement coming out earlier than this? Unless there were nefarious situations here, meaning that committing suicide, even if you're in pain, etc., is not overly acceptable. The bottom line is that if you can't function, your life is over with. So if he had dementia and he had all these problems like Robin Williams did, you can't function in the way that you want to. Is that life worth living? So the whole idea is that these are how wouldn't be understandable to do this. Certainly, everything else that goes with his philosophy certainly isn't a great showing. But the point is, if you are highly but it means that, Satan Set didn't take care of him. So, and this goes with anybody who has strong beliefs or is a practitioner of anything. So the whole idea is that certainly he's not this old guy living well, and he had lots of money. There was no reason for him. He had a great lifestyle. He had a big property in Scotland. All the stuff that he did that he was able to party with to do right now, there's no reason why he would do any of this because life was bad. Life was great, unless he was sick and in a very bad condition with dementia or in pain or something else. This would then make sense. If he did this out of I'm bored with the world or despondent, well, that makes another problem. So the whole idea is that we just don't know, and we don't know if this is the cause of death. As I said, this information came to me just randomly on left as a comment on my video I made about him. We don't know. It appears to come from a person who has satanic leanings and apparently is involved in that movement, stating the fact that someone that he knows was able to get a hold of his death certificate. I'm sure it's public record somewhere. And that's what it stated he died of a close gunshot wound to the head. So that's, as I said, at this point is kind of gossip. We just don't know. But you have to go by that when you can't get other information. You have to go by that when the Temple of Set and other people are not coming forward stating everything that's involved. And why wouldn't you? Well, you wouldn't because of the fact that it doesn't sound good. Like L. Ron Hubbard, who I believe died in his early 70s and was going through mental problems as well. Certainly not the great Scientologist who can live on indefinitely with all these powers when you die in your early 70s. This is pretty bad. So, and it's pretty bad that this guy died in his early 70s as well, that he wasn't empowered enough. If you're going to talk about how great you are and everything else, well, you're going to have to back that up with some physical evidence. And of course, the Temple of Set have never done that in their drip-drab, horrible writings. And the goofball comic, Don Webb, who ran that for years, the science fiction writer, since they really, I'm sure they have difficulties getting somebody to take over the Temple of Set. They don't have very many members. People think there may be 300 members worldwide out of 8 billion people. Like most of these movements. I don't think the Temple of Set ever did much of anything. I don't know how many books they sold or anything else, but the bottom line is that it's not a lot. And it's not something that would have contributed to income to any of these people, unless Aquino is paying these people, and we don't know that. He seemed to have been cheap in the past. He wouldn't take care of Anton LaVey, who needed money, even though his pockets were stuffed full of it, and it's unlikely that anybody is doing this. So people go in there for the fame of it, and like Webb did, who now has stopped being the head of the Temple of Set and is going back to his comic writings. So all of this, adds up to something that is very interesting. And what does it all mean since we can't get information? So if anybody else has further information on this and they can collaborate the actual his cause of death and what he was ill with, if he was ill, certainly would be helpful. I think we should know. I always like to know, well, what happened to these people? What did they die of? How long did they live? I think this is a measuring stick for all of us to look at. So if we don't look at these things, then we're kind of living in, well, what happened? And why wasn't this announced more? I mean, certainly is a guy who's very public. You go to Kindle Books, and he's got like 10 books he's selling there. So it's not like he's trying to hide. And he did interviews everywhere. He never tried to hide any of his stuff. And I'm assuming did pretty much any interview that was offered to him. So the whole idea is not a guy that was trying to hide. He's a public figure. We should at least know that he died not a year later. We should know what he died of, what the situation was, period. And then go from there. If you want, the minute you start putting these things in the veil of mystery, the darkness hidden behind a veil, all sorts of things start to come up. So we just don't know what the full story is here. And I don't like to report anything as fact. We don't know. Now, what are you doing, Temple of Set? I'm sure they know that. Why isn't there an official announcement? I always hate when they say, well, this person has died. Well, yeah, died of what? I think it's important we know what these people die of. Did they die of natural causes? Were they killed? Did they commit suicide? What is this? Were they sick or not? I always look up what, particularly on Seweropedia, what people died of. What is the illness? To find out, they died young. Yeah, well, and then it also says that, they were smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day. Well, we all know that contributes to early death. And what else did people die of? Different medical conditions, etc. And all this makes sense in most people's lives. Some people die very young for one reason or another. They get cancer, etc. Well, he didn't die young, and the point is that how sick was he? So if anyone knows, as I said, contact me. Another interesting fact in this whole saga of Michael Aquino and his strange organization and all the connections he had there, and this fairly large group of military Satanists he had following him, particularly at the Presidio. Now, the Presidio up there, and I've been contacted by someone who spent some time there, rented apparently from the government some of the buildings there, and you could see the fact that and there were bunkers and everything else up on these hills, which are all around California. Presidio is in Northern California near San Francisco, and they had these little bunkers or gun turrets all up and down the coast of California. And apparently there were all sorts of remnants of and strange graffiti and everything else in these bunkers where he did a lot of rituals. And there's also a lot of very strange evil energies there. When you drive in that area, you feel it. And secondly, this person has reported to me that their radios would go off in their cars when they drove up there, and other strange things were sighted. Certainly would be very surprised that this would be a haunted area. And I don't think you can access this area, the Presidio up there, any longer, even though I don't think it's a military base. The military owns it, and they rent out properties there, apartments, but I'm not sure anybody can get access there or not. Maybe you can, but certainly this would be a place to investigate all sorts of spirits and evil spirits if people would go in there and try and record some of this stuff. But since it's government property, you probably can't do any of that. And there's just a lot of strange happenings going on there still, and was going on back then. As I said, he had a whole little group of 4 or 5 other officers that were involved in Satanism at this time. And it was kind of popular back then, and there were benefits to it, especially since he lived in San Francisco. You could go to Anton LaVey's meetings, which had lots of nude babes and probably lots of sex and all the other stuff that goes with it. This is how Satanism took off, because there was drugs and sex available. So it's pretty hard not to get a showing when you offer that. So, and certainly the military is no white lighters or good guys in any ways. These are people that deal with death and murder, and that's what they do. So the morality level of the military, who just sees killing as part of their job, certainly is not going to have a big problem with some kinky sex or even getting involved in evil spirits. So his whole story is an interesting one. It's hard to find out his military record and what he did. He apparently was in Vietnam, etc. All of this is shrouded in mystery, even though I pick up bits and pieces. He claimed to send demonic energies into battlefield areas and clear them out. Well, certainly Vietnam wasn't any show of any kind of victory. Also stated that he was the big witch doctor over there and would do all sorts of things to scare the people. And probably so. He was a psychological operative there, using psychological warfare. So what you're going to do is put up really weird stuff and have demonic images. And this is certainly going to scare the enemy to a certain degree. So maybe to a large degree. You're not used to seeing that weird stuff. You come into an area where that is going on, and this would probably be very frightening. And as such, you'd probably stay away from there. We just don't know. And he's a very strange guy that watched everything he said and tried to come off as this kind of meek, non-threatening person. Now, I don't think he was. He stated that one of his first so-called combat missions as a special forces operator in Vietnam is that he was dropped into a particular area with a group of others, and they had some sort of minor skirmish, and he was vomiting everywhere from the stress of doing this. It was probably quite common. Just like it's quite common to poop your pants when you get in these things. This is how it works. So this is not unusual. But, why would you say that? Well, you're trying to make yourself out as this weak, fearful person, which is quite different from the potentially deadly and Satanist who wants to kill people and everything else. So, very, very strange, and he's always come off this way. And, of course, I'm sure that's the reason why he was also able to get on in the military. He certainly obeyed orders, was very intelligent for a military person, and knew how to talk and present himself. So, plain and simple. So this is a major reason of why. So if you listen to him and you listen to his talks and his, Geraldo Rivera interviewed him in the famous talk show situation back then and so forth. So these are all part of the persona of this guy and why he was able to actually survive so long. But it's a very interesting case, and it's still, as with everything with this guy, nothing is really straightforward. As I said, he's written a whole bunch of novels and other books, Mind Wars, which he talks about psychological warfare. Apparently there's 2 volumes of that. So, there's all sorts of books he's written out there that you can easily get and download on Kindle. And anybody who wants to read these should and report back to me. I don't really have time to read all these things, but he does have a lot. So he's very prolific when he retired. Also, as he said, I don't know how much time he spent in Scotland, but he likes to dress up in a kilt with a funny hat and say that he's a lord. What does that tell us about somebody? This guy is, I don't know if he has any Scottish heritage or not. Basically, from what I understand, he's Italian. But the bottom line is that, he's got an Italian name. And, of course, a lot of Aquinos are more Latin than they're Italian, so I'm not sure what his background is. But generally, that's his father's name. His mother could have been Scottish. I don't know. So, but these are all the things that, it's almost kind of childish. You put on these funny little outfits, buy a piece of land that gives you title, and kind of play like a 10-year-old. But, of course, I guess that goes back to his Boy Scout days and getting all the badges. So, but he claims to have done all these other things with no evidence to it whatsoever. And I don't know I frankly doubt he wrote down any complicated or powerful rituals, if there is any. And again, he was able to make, he was successful because Mommy had lots of money. He was able to run the Temple of Set because he had all this cash from Mommy. Secondly, he had a big-time job. And it's amazing how many Satanists work for the government. So the whole idea is he had this big-time officer's salary as well. And officers are paid very well and have lots of benefits. And apparently lots of freedom to act as goofy as they want. So the whole idea is that this is what was going on with him. So yes, he was, and he was a person who had the money to go to college, could spend 4 years there because Mommy paid for him. He obviously could get into college and had a certain scholastic level. All of this is part of the reality that he was able to go through. But political science is not exactly a big-time degree. As I said, that's the goofball degree. Everybody takes political science because it's an easy course. So with that, he didn't take anything scientific. He didn't take anthropology. He didn't go things that he could have studied, witchcraft and other things. Didn't do any of that stuff. Then took that basic 4-year degree and then went into the military indirectly. He didn't go to officer's candidate school. I guess because he had a 4 years degree, he was able to kind of bump in through the reserves or something. That's a little cloudy. And again, I'm not going to spend hours searching this out. So he got in there under the reserves and was able to go to all these military schools, which, as I've said in the past, they just love people who graduate from all these military schools and get all these internal certificates. So all of that is parcel of what he's about. And it's just kind of interesting because there's all these things that is shrouded in these charges of child molestation, and there were apparently, and we just don't know the complete story here, that it's been alleged that children have come forward and identified his secret entrance. They identified where they were taken to. It was quite complicated of the information they gave. Now, whether this was fed to them, whether he was set up for this because of the type of situation he was in, who knows? But this is practices of what these people do. And I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure being in the military, they thought they could get away with all this because that's how the military is. He had a tight-run organization there. He had many military officers he worked with and who he was the commanding officer with, that he supported him. It's very interesting that the daycare where all this happened caught fire and burned down. And all the records that were in the daycare, which is so typical, all these records and everything else were lost. Another convenient fire, which is very typical of these situations. So, the evidence that something was going on there, whether minor or major, certainly points to the fact that this is certainly what was happening there. Something strange was happening. This is not unusual. These are people that are drunk with power. They get away with things. They're in groups. They're going to kinky meetings, having freaky sex, and doing all the things that Satanists do. Now, Anton LaVey, who died penniless and had his entire organization taken away from him by his ex-wife, who divorced him, and virtually made nothing. He never had any income of any speak of. The Satanic Bible sold millions, but you're talking about a $2 book. What did he get per these things? 10 cents? 20 cents? I mean, people don't understand that. You get paid very little. And, of course, that's one of the most stolen books out there, so his estate isn't making very much today either. So we run into all this stuff, and we have to look at all these things. His daughter disowned him, and now is some tantric, and of course living in Berlin. So all of the stuff that is going on out there is very, very typical. And what do we look at this? Yeah, do we need to look at this? I have very limited time, so I can't do the kind of research I want in these areas. And who cares? You make a thorough research in this area, come on, nobody cares. So to the bigger picture here. But it is interesting. As I said, I found out about him through this radio show and other things, and then found the people that he was working with were involved. Edred Flowers, who were involved in Nordic pagan groups, were Satanists. So all this kind of tied together, so I kind of got involved with that. And, of course, he was at the time, thought of as the serious runic author, doing his research and so forth. But now he's really come out to tell us where his research centers on. Of course, he's moved away from the fake connection of the Germans with the runes, which has never really been the case. The Germans are not. They're Aryans, they're Iranians. Now he's doing the actual Iranian research and going back to ancient pagan demons. This is the heart of it all that they never would talk about, because the pagan movements, which were Nazi, didn't want to American Nazis. Nazis are not white people. They never were. This is another nonsense out there. But all of this intermixes with that, and him and a whole bunch of other people were connected to this bizarre Nazi magic. Of the lowest level, and of course he tried to tie all this in, as the Germans themselves did, to try and tie in Nordic practices into their debased Iranian Arabic practices. So all of this came into what's going on, and I've talked about that some degree, and I may do further on that in terms of understanding all these connections here. But this is how it got tied. It's very interesting. Of course, Edred Flowers, is still active with his own little group. His books are now published by major publishers. This Nazi guy is being published by a Jewish Bear Books, or publishing his books. The Jewish guy and other things. So it's just kind of amusing. As usual, this world spins in a very bizarre way, wobbly, freaky, and you never know what's going to happen. But I'm not really sure that Michael Aquino has left anything. He's left a lot of very badly written, boring books where he endlessly talks about things. He put a giant, very self-serving history of the Church of Satan together. There are 2 huge volumes on that, which he has kept everything that he did in the Temple of Set, very typical of this kind of person, and all the letters from Anton LaVey and everything else. But they were never close. They were never close whatsoever. And I don't think anybody took him too seriously. I can't believe that in the 1970s and 60s, people were too happy with these military guys coming into the Church of Satan. So I would think that the military in general is just totally anti-satanic. Talk about, well, we're freedom people. We don't want to be told what to do and follow standards of society, except in the military where they tell me when I can poop. So all of this doesn't even make sense. Now, you certainly wouldn't be a freedom lover being in the military. In a time when the military was kind of hated, people were being murdered every day in Vietnam that didn't want to go there. So all of this, he was not looking. Anton LaVey didn't have on. They gave him the job that nobody wanted, writing the newsletter, and I've talked about this before. So it's all very interesting. If people have any further information, please leave that in the comments here, email me, etc. It would be nice to put together some facts. It would be nice to put together the real story, and that's what I always am seeking. Not anybody who's self-serving on one side of the aisle or not. What really happened? If we can ever find that, and most times you can't. Until next time.